Cool. So, you are a contributor to, I see, Spectator US most recently,
Right.
and then something called Real Life Mag. What's
Uh-huh.
that about?
It's sort of a technology. I think their slogan is sort of a magazine about living with technology. So
Okay.
yeah, I think it's how did I get clued into them? So I've presented a couple of times at this conference in New York called Theorizing the Web, which is a pretty interesting event. And the people who run Real Life are sort of affiliated with that conference. And actually, as I understand it, both are affiliated with Snapchat. Like they both received funding from Snapchat. So
Oh,
yeah, so there's kind of a like the I think the guy who one of the organizers of both is like a sociologist, but who works for Snap. So there's sort of an industry connection there, which is kind of interesting.
yeah. A lot of criticism of the web, and when I say criticism, I mean like negative. It seems associated with the industry itself. Like they'll
Mhm.
if it's either something like that where there's some kind of forum that is somehow subsidized by the industry, or it's people who it's coming from people who have worked in it and might still work in it,
Right, right.
right? So yeah, it's almost like a cottage industry of people who were in tech and then leave and then become evangelists of a sort for why tech is a problem in different ways.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Right,
Tristan
like
Harris, I think, is a guy who does that.
uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of like Jaron Lanier as well.
Oh yeah, big
Um,
time.
who I reviewed one of his books a while ago. Um, so yeah, he's an interesting character as like a total insider, but who's kind of been on the very critical angle for a long time.
Yeah, it's crazy. I recall seeing like it might not have been footage, but it's like images or something of him working on VR like back in the 90s. And he
Yeah.
looks
Mhm.
exactly the same except a younger face. It's like a fresh face kind of. It's got
All
the
right.
big dreads, like the big
It's
dreads and stuff, the natty dreads. Yeah.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
but yeah,
I
I'm
mean, yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I mean, what is that? So do you regard that as like a sort of controlled opposition type thing, or is it like a do you?
Well, I mean, it might be, but I'm not really in a place. I'm not really in a place to criticize like that. I'm not a full-time employee at Google, but I work for a contractor who works for Google. I basically do Google stuff. So, I'm perfectly predictable as far as that goes too. I can't, you know, throw shade with a way that has
Yeah,
much
that's
credibility. Um,
interesting.
yeah. Yeah, Jaron Lanier, you say you reviewed a book of his. Was it that one? It seems like I saw it at a bookstore, Moe's Books in Berkeley. It's pretty good. It's somewhat thick. I saw a paperback version of it. It seems like it was a covering the rise of counterculture and maybe VR specifically.
No,
Is
it was I think who owns the future, and
oh okay,
uh,
yeah.
it's sort of about. I mean, it's quite it's really about the whole issue of kind of labor in the context of um, social media, and I mean, basically the idea is that there are all these ways that we're kind of induced to like contribute labor that in some
Oh
way
right. And we don't get paid for it. And
able to
he
functioning of these and sort of profits of these platforms. So his whole proposal is kind of to create a sort of micropayment system and also to kind of enhance like intellectual property protections so that basically you kind of own your sort of online productions. So it's quite an out there proposal if you read
yeah.
it. It's like he sort of thinks
Oh,
and anytime like the platform in some sense profits, and it's a little bit vague like how they would even define this, but like in some way profits off of like what you've contributed, then that becomes your it's your property and thus becomes a source of income for you.
yeah. I think people have crunched the numbers, and it doesn't amount to very much. It's way less satisfying than a UBI. Not that it's meant to be any kind of substitute for that, but I guess it would be like a supplement or something.
You know much about Urbit?
Urbit. No, I don't know about that. People have name dropped it, but what's that about?
I don't know that much about it, but I think it sort of has to do with like an owner. It's something I need to learn a bit about because I think I'm going to be talking to some people from there at some point. But
Yeah.
it has something to do with kind of rebuild. I mean, it's really a kind of rebuilding the internet from the ground up and providing greater sort of ownership, as I understand it. But
Yeah,
but I mean, in that, Lanier talks about how all the protocols like that evolved like came about so accidentally, right? And so part of his position is that there was kind of just this this sort of accidental series of things that made the system the way that it is, and sort of now we can see that it's not ideal in certain respects. So we need to kind of rebuild it and rethink how we understand, particularly the nature of like IP. But anyway,
yeah, that's like the perennial dream of a lot of people in Silicon Valley. It is maybe more so than people critical of Silicon Valley, and that gets back to the connection where the criticism is coming from people within it, because it's such a rarefied sort of thing to be discussing that you'd almost have to be in it to talk about it with much authority, right?
Sure.
So, but yeah, that came up a lot in that Silicon Valley show on HBO. That was the dream product, right? It's going to be. Yeah. So, yeah, in a way that along with automation and Andrew Yang style democratic politics, it struggles to find a place among the 20th century politics that keeps beating us over the head, right? Like it won't really go away, and it's more than just a sort of generic. We still think in terms of communist versus fascist, blah blah blah, but just a lot of a 20th century political agitation, especially late 20th century, it seems to continue and become even more salient as we move into the 21st century, like race politics, for instance.
Right.
So it's hard to get a kind of Vulcan or very Vulcan style, high rationalist, high modernist, Silicon Valley oriented critiques to really catch on and latch on with people. So
yeah, I mean, I guess I think about that in a couple of ways. One is sort of that there's the question of what actually sort of drives people on the most visceral level, right? Which often seems to be, I mean, the one thing I've written about is kind of these sacrificial dynamics, right? What actually what sort of what seems to actually animate people's politics are these kind of symbolic events and moments that we all kind of are drawn to, like moths to a flame. And then, but then the other thing that I think is weird, kind of relating to what you said, it's kind of this this idea that we're kind of living in this world of kind of accumulated like signs that are like relics of ages, kind of accumulated from ages past, and much of it is, it's related to the whole kind of retro culture thing and how everything is kind of somehow a resurrection of some 20th century iconic cultural moment. So like, the media has created this whole archive that now we can just kind of draw upon. And so there's this constant kind of dipping back into the archive, and that we're just kind of mostly perceiving the world by way of this kind of accumulated like sign system that largely comes out of the 20th century, and we're just kind of playing with the fragments of that.
Yeah.
So, and then you can see that in politics, right? It's like like Mark Fisher sort of is one person who talks about this.
Right.
Simon
Reynolds comes to mind here. His book Retromania, which seems to overlap with with Mark Fisher's cultural critique of the just the prolonged marination in 20th century tropes. For Simon Reynolds, music is the primary focus, and Mark Fisher, I think, has a music criticism background as well to some degree. But yeah.
But that and then you see that in politics, right? That it's like I mean, there are all these different versions of it, right? But really, you can almost see so much politics as different forms of kind of retro nostalgia for this kind of mid-century Fordist dispensation, right? Where like, you have like the Bernie thing is like one version of that, right? That in some ways, I mean, very, the whole, I mean, if you listen to somebody on the more kind of left of mainstream Democratic side, if you listen to somebody like Robert Reich or even like somebody like very, boringly mainstream like Krugman, that they're very much just about like, how do we go back to the sort of height of post-war prosperity moment, right? And then on the other hand, you have you've seen these like ridiculous. There's some like traditional, these sort of trad Twitter accounts where like, there'll be some like advertising picture of like some 50s housewife like taking a casserole out of the oven or something, and they'll be like, this is the tradition we need to return to. But in fact, the tradition is just the sort of evanescent moment of like post-war prosperity, right?
Yeah, those trad Twitter accounts. It's funny how you can detect the politics from the picture alone. I think it's neo-reaction. I think has a lot of the like a I don't know, Thomas Aquinas painting or a Greek statue or something like that, and then or maybe some architecture. I was gonna say the old Notre Dame now, which 2 years ago you could call the old Notre Dame. So yeah, you can tell a lot about that.
The classical statues, right?
Yeah.
The classical statue Abbey sort of thing.
What statue is that?
The sort of Grecian, like Greco-Roman statue.
Yeah.
But yes, so but again, it's like just this, on one hand, it's really this like again, it's just this 20th century like accumulated sign system that everybody's just like taking pieces of, and that kind of becomes the stand-in for their like political identity or affiliation. Yeah,
the 21st century's unique contributions are basically some kind of reassembling of those things,
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, okay. So I'm thinking about, well, okay, so there were criticisms, say, of hip hop in the 90s that would say, well, they're just sampling old music. They're not really creating something new. But now we look back and say, well, no, that was obviously something new itself. It's a little hard to kind of get outside of it sufficiently and say, well, there really is stagnation. And yet I feel confident there really is stagnation here. So,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean
at least politically and to a great deal actual fashion that seems to have just been stalled, right? It's just a endless remixing of clothing styles. So fashion-wise, as far as literal fashion, I don't see too much new happening. Now, I don't work in the industry, it's true, but I do know that there are not you don't see, just say compared to 5 years ago, like all new ways of wearing pants. It's not like, okay, so you had raver pants, the super wide leg pants, right? That was a thing. Then it was skinny pants. Now it's kind of like, some skinny pants, some raver pants. Basically, if there is fashion trends going on there, they're very, I don't know, localized. You have to get very granular to see it. It's not kind of a mass movement thing anymore.
Right.
Mass fashion movement.
I mean, two things on that. I mean, it's interesting, like, I've been digging a lot back into Baudrillard lately, and, one of his ideas is that the fashion is like the sort of paradigmatic industry. And his argument is that like the logic of fashion comes to basically pervade everything else, right? So that everything behaves according to the rules of fashion. So and the idea of that is that, fashion, it's a sign, it's a sign system where value is entirely relative and differential, right? So in other words, something is popular precisely because it's a contrast to the thing that was popular last year, right? So these things don't have any intrinsic value. The value is entirely relational, right? And so I think, we can see how that unfolds like over time with like the relaxed fit jeans to skinny jeans sort of
Yeah.
trend. But then, as you're saying, it seems like, now what we have is just a fragmentation where there are all these different. There's no center, right? The sort of, and you can see this in all the. This is something I've been writing about lately. It's like, it's this really great essay by this guy, L.M. Sakassis, who has a really excellent newsletter called The Convivial Society. And he had the concept of narrative collapse. And basically the idea is that
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Cut out for 1 second. Did you say narrative collapse?
Narrative collapse.
Okay,
yeah. So the idea is that the sort of information system that we live in doesn't really allow for kind of single or central narratives to take hold anymore, because of it's sort of his argument is that it's governed by the logic of the database, right, where you just have this kind of accumulation and distribution, but you don't have and that works against the ability to kind of extract a central narrative out of it. So people try to do that, but what you then end up with is this totally fragmentary system where people are just living in different narratives, right? So you have narratives, but you don't have like a narrative. Is sort of the argument. Like people are sort of improvising narratives, that are operative like within their own sort of enclave or whatever. But the information system sort of creates this fragmentation
across domains, not simply literal fashion or music or I was about to say popular books, but I don't. Yeah, I guess that counts as well. But so we're in this period where I guess if you're going to find something novel, it will be an exaggerated version of the culture jamming that you heard discussed at the end of the 90s with Adbusters, but just that much more, I guess, unpredictable in the way that it arranges things that are themselves predictable, right? So, like, if you look at any one piece of this new compelling piece of cultural artifact, you'll recognize a lot there. But you won't see the kind of novelty you would have seen, let's say between the years 1960 and 1990 or 1980, really, if you want to get even more distinct, right? It's just an absolute explosion of stuff.
Right. Oh. Yeah, no, we're just kind of playing with the piece, like the fragments of that now for the most part. And actually, like, so did you see this this goes back to the whole trad sort of meme account stuff, but did you see this Budweiser ad, the like reject modernity, embrace tradition, stuff on, so it's, as far as I know, it's just a social media ad. Maybe it's just a can of Bud Light and a can of Budweiser, and like it says reject modernity above the can of Bud Light and embrace tradition above the can of Budweiser, right? Wow. So there's so much in that. It's just like, I feel like it encapsulates everything.
The second part of it, the embrace tradition, seems so strange. It's that first part that's a giveaway that they're paying attention to online politics, right? It's like reject modernity. Like, are you some kind of like Twitter philosophy nerd? Who says reject modernity? I've heard embrace tradition from the likes of you marketing people, but not that first part. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
But so first of all, going back to the culture jamming idea, right? I feel like a lot of people are responding to that as sort of this shows that the whole kind of creative meme culture of, like the 4chan world and all that from, 10 years ago, which had like a very interesting and ambiguous reception, right? Where like you had Anonymous, which like had a lot of sort of positive coverage and was like kind of regarded pretty positively by, like liberal media outlets and stuff. And then with 2016, it all shifted and like 4chan became evil and fascists and so on. But
yeah, their whole view on tech seemed to have done a total 180, right? So in 2008, Facebook and MySpace were being talked about. Facebook was pretty new at the time, but people were heralding that the bright young tech savvy things that were surrounding Obama helped propel him to the presidency. And then 2012, you also saw that, and then it just turned overnight. And now I feel like I'm being retconned as far as how to think about tech. Like, well, it's always been subversive and friendly to the right. That's not how the conversation went. Like a very brief time ago.
But I mean, what's interesting is like, I don't know, this, I don't know if, did you see this documentary, TFW, No Geoff? That was kind of about the sort of NEETs and like incel culture and all that.
Yeah.
I reviewed that.
You reviewed that?
It was definitely like explicitly kind of treating them at, like, I think it was inspired by this, I can't remember what it's called, but this documentary about like the LA punk scene in the 80s. Like, because I was listening to the director talking about it, like how it was really trying to be similar to these documentaries that like document a sort of like a creative subculture, right?
Well, that would, if it's like an LA documentary on 80s punk scene, it would make it feel as if the agenda is to make incels kind of cool. They're really working against a lot there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that really was like the director really saw it as just a sort of interesting, creative, genuinely countercultural scene, right? And wanted to document it for that reason. And, but, so what I find, going back to the Budweiser ad, what seems interesting is that like, that shows, it's like the Nirvana moment or something like that. It's like, this, whatever kind of subversive creativity, the whole kind of internet meme culture, and especially like reactionary internet meme culture might have represented, like now it's just like providing templates for Budweiser ads, so
yeah,
it's all just
level of
plausible
viability there too. I mean, I guess I didn't see the ad. I don't know if there's any kind of iconography or imagery other than the Bud Light cans, but reject modernity, embrace tradition. I mean, if someone were pressed on it, you could say, well, it's not about embracing tradism or somehow. The flip side of that is that the trad people could say, well, they're not co-opting our whole worldview and making it uncool. It's not. You can't prove that was the inspiration, but it kind of is. It almost certainly is what I mean. I don't know for sure, but it almost certainly is.
But I mean, it's a very also just it's so. I mean, again, this is like kind of a Baudrillardian idea, but the way that like the Budweiser is providing both the product and the sort of counter product, right? So it's defining both the thing that you're, it's providing both the thing you're rejecting ostensibly according to this ad and the thing you're supposed to embrace. So it's like it's sort of playing both sides of the game, right? Which and like his argument is that this sort of binary structure is like the whole, and it has to do with this kind of this idea of like it's the fashion system as well, right? It's like everything is defined only in relation to other, like every sign is defined in relation to other signs within the system. So everything is just defined differentially. But and that's kind of the.
I'm sorry. That actually makes me think of how much of online politics is essentially a reaction to the other side, right? So, woke can't exist without Trump and Proud Boy. Everything is basically somehow reactionary. I mean, there's big R reactionary, then there's this kind of small R reactionary, which is how everyone's defining themselves against something else. So, people have made the argument that a lot of politics is increasingly fashion, and this, if it is like this Bud Light marketing campaign, then I see the overlap. I see the argument. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And I mean, I guess what's so funny about this Budweiser thing to me is like it's not even trying to hide the fact that it's kind of playing both sides of the game, or like it's in a way that's the joke, right?
Yeah. We'll see.
It's making fun of the fact that it is, I don't know. So it's that kind of open cynicism or whatever that is also interesting about it. Right?
Who wrote a lot about that was David Foster Wallace. To talk about how basically capitalism had co-opted cynicism against capitalism and just turned that into a marketing thing too. And now we're like a few decades deep into that, maybe about, I'd say about 3 decades, maybe slightly less actually. I mean, I noticed it in the 90s. Something, an example that comes to mind is the Carl's Jr. commercial. If it, a guy eating a big burger and it the ketchup spills all over his shoes, and he says, narrator says, if it's not getting all over the place, it doesn't belong in your face. So they're just sort of, they're owning the big sloppiness of big sloppy is the term I'm going to come up with here. Big sloppy. They're owning that kind of idea. And also, Taco Bell, I recall, had started depicting their own customers as just, louts and stoners, who are just looking for an easy meal. And like we know that you're gonna see yourself depicted by this, and we can still trust that you're gonna spend money on that.
Yeah.
We just said fuck you. We called you a Homer Simpson essentially, but and then Simpson himself is also kind of, I guess he's supposed to be endearing, right? Not an insult. So yeah, we're deep into this kind of owned cynicism, or
yeah. Well, and this is sort of the why it's so hard to have a counterculture, right? Because once you have that as the kind of basic structure of marketing, it creates this formula by which everything can be integrated, right? So, I mean, this is actually also like Zizek's first book, or I think it's his first book, Sublime Object of Ideology. It's all about this, and that's from like 1990. But
it's amazing how many books he's written since 1990. That was the one that launched it all, huh? Wow. He even came out with a COVID book extremely quickly.
I know, yeah. I got that, and I did not. I think I read the first couple chapters, but then got distracted. But I don't know.
Yeah, by coronavirus news. Yeah, like it's still too newsworthy for me to want to read a book about it rather than just keep looking at Twitter or something. I feel like I forced you to pivot away from that first book though. The Sublime Object of Ideology, 1990. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Oh no, it's just it's kind of about it starts with this discussion of sort of cynical ideology, and the idea is that the traditional sort of Marxist model of ideology was that if it was kind of false consciousness, so that the problem is that like people are kind of trapped in this world of illusions, right? But if you show them if you show them the truth, then you can kind of free them from the way that they've been kind of deluded by ideology into accepting the system, right? So that's like the old model. And then in that book, it kind of starts out by discussing how, what we're actually looking at is the opposite, right? Where everybody claims to understand perfect, which is why these ads are the way they are, right? Like no one is sort of innocently just believing that ads are truthful or reliable or something like that. Like everyone is cynical about them, and so they're the way they operate has to incorporate that cynicism. So his like formula of it is, there's this phrase from Marx that's like they don't know what they're doing, but they do it, right? So that's like in other words, they don't know what they're they don't know that they're sort of participating in this like ideological system. But in their everyday life, they're sort of playing into it. But then the cynical version is they know what they're doing, but they do it, right? So everyone knows that they're being screwed over and lied to and so on, but nevertheless they keep. That makes me want to differentiate, I guess, two forms of advertising. There's a kind of advertising that actually expresses useful information and makes sort of specific claims. And then there's sort of like the very established brands who are like Bud Light or McDonald's or something that are really just competing for mind share for people who would go to the other place that everyone already knows about. So they don't really have to present factual claims necessarily. They only have to show a delicious burger or something and come up with some funny quip surrounding it.